Hi everyone, I'm Saleha and this is Chai Chat and Community. Before I introduce you to my guest tonight, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land on which we are meeting, and I'd like to pay my respects to their past, present, and emerging. Today, I'm chatting with Farah Farouque, who is the CEO of the Ethnic Community Council of Victoria, or ECCV, as we all know. ECCV has a special place in my heart. 20 years ago, when we moved to Australia and settled in Melbourne, um, we had just, my daughter had just gone into year 10 and she was asked to do work experience. And we had no idea what work experience was because in India, or I suppose even in the subcontinent, there is no concept of work experience. But a friend of mine who was then the CEO of ECCV got her a job she did a week of work experience at ECCV, and then that work experience extended to about 30 days or 40 days. She got paid, she worked long hours, and she loved it. And she learned the value of money because that was her first job in Australia. And since then, I'm happy to say she's just worked. So without further ado, please meet Farah Farouque. And Farah, thank you so much for joining me today. I have been so impressed with you since I met you at the Indian Care Dinner. And thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's such a pleasure to be here. I'm coming to the office, especially to talk to you. So that shows how much I value you. Like many Australians, my home internet connection can be a little bit, shall we say, temperamental. So I thought, just to be safe, I'll transmit from the office in case anyone was wondering how my home was constructed in the background. But it's such a pleasure to be here and to connect with people from South Asian backgrounds because, well, it's quite evident. I too have a South Asian background and have a deep affinity to the communities that go under the banner South Asian.
Okay, so tell us something about yourself. Were you born here? Did you move here like us? Whatever you want to share.
Of course, I'm an open book. I'm a child migrant. My father was came as a skilled migrant, accompanied by my mother and two of my siblings. Our family then subsequently expanded. I'm one of 7 siblings, and four of whom were born in Australia and 3 in Sri Lanka, which is where I'm from originally. My background is that I'm a Sri Lankan Muslim, which means that I'm from a minority community in Sri Lanka. So I have long experience of being a member of a minority community. My parents migrated to Adelaide. My dad was an academic. And so ours was, a sort of a bit more of a seamless, journey. Dad already had a job when he came in the latter part of the 70s. And and so it was, we had quite a lot of support and we settled into, Adelaide is very different from Melbourne in that Melbourne, yes, even in the 70s, Melbourne was quite, much more diverse. Adelaide is, less diverse. And so I think we might have been the only Sri Lankan Muslims in the Sri Lankan broader diaspora community. But ours has always been a family that mixes with all communities. So we've never sort of stuck to one group, whether it be religious group or ethnic group. Some of my parents' closest friends actually happen to be from Indian backgrounds. And actually, I remember a Pakistani uncle as well frequenting the home, as well as many other, nationalities and, of course, Australian Anglo background people. So, look, from the earliest days, I've had a very multicultural experience. And my journey's been interesting in that, growing up in Australia, coming from a different culture, you don't always own your background, as much as I do now in the more latter stages of my career. You want to, not that you see yourself as removed, but, you see yourself as more individualized. And but I'm really owning my background now because I'm the CEO of Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria and a very proud one at that. though only been in the job for 6 months.
So you were a journalist.
That's right. Well, look, in the typical sort of migrant trajectory, I studied law at university. I have a brother who studied medicine, rest assured. So we stuck to that script somewhat. And but you know what? Shock horror in the law degree. I just felt it wasn't quite for me, and I broke the news to my dad, who wasn't entirely embracing of my decision. I said I wanted to be a journalist, and that was there was no history of anyone who being a journalist. I think it was seen as a little bit of a sort of slightly revolutionary career to embark on without any ties here or whatever. But I was determined, and I'm proud to say both my parents, Hamid and Nazli Farouque, who are in their 80s now, were incredibly supportive. They never tried to impose pathways to me. Of course, there were gentle suggestions, but they were very supportive of my aspirations. And I come from a family where girls and the daughters were valued and encouraged as much as their sons. So ours was a thoroughly contemporary South Asian household, as are many migrant households. And I was very fortunate. No one ever held me back around gender or culture or religion. I was free to make my own choices. And, an example was set at home, but, no one tried to impose or restrict me in any way, which was fantastic. So, of course, I embarked on my journalistic career, and I moved to Melbourne in my 20s to join The Age newspaper as a journalist. I was that very rare thing in an Australian mainstream newspaper, context, newsroom. There weren't many multicultural background people at all. But, I was in that phase of not entirely sort of, I didn't define myself by my ethnicity or culture or religion as such. I saw myself as, a professional. It's a little bit limiting, that kind of thinking in a way, because you can never, you are your background, your culture, your ethnicity.
Absolutely, yes.
Absolutely. So I've become a much more sophisticated, member of the multicultural community. But I think particularly that says something about people, when you arrive and you're a child migrant, and whether consciously or unconsciously, you're trying to fit in, perhaps. And
yes, you do.
Yeah. So, but I mean, that said, ours was a household that attended the mosque regularly. It was a multicultural mosque.
Yeah.
And I, learned, Quranic recitation and all the things that you learn. So it was a household where those values, that from home, and sort of it was an observant household in that sense. So as I've grown older, as I say, I've leaned in more into my ethnicity and culture, and I'm really proud of that.
Great, this is fantastic. So why ECCV?
That's interesting, isn't it? Well, look, I've had multiple careers now, which is sort of a common experience for people in their 20s and 30s. They say you have maybe a 6-time career. I'm a bit older than in my 20s and 30s, but after 20 years in the Melbourne Age newsroom, where I had a fantastic sort of opportunities, I was able to go on overseas assignments. I was the newspaper's first social affairs editor, covering social policy issues and leading a small team that did that. I spent 5 years covering state and federal politics, including 2.5 years in the Canberra Press Gallery. And again, may I add, in the Canberra Press Gallery in the 90s, a person of colour and a South Asian background was a very rare
broken
entity.
Glass ceilings.
Yeah, I didn't feel like that. I was on my journey, as a law arts graduate, and I was sort of seeing myself as my journey. But actually, you're quite right. I mean, you come with your cultural background, etc. So, look, I didn't sort of frame it that way. But yes, I mean, when I looked around in those corridors, there weren't people who looked like me, etc. But I did. Yes. I have to acknowledge, I think when we're talking about migrants, there are layers of privilege, aren't there? And I'm really conscious of the fact that I'm the daughter of a university academic. My mother has also a university graduate. So, I mean, I'm privileged educationally. And, I always recognize that. My struggles are different from, say, people who've come without educational qualifications or a guaranteed job.
Refugees
and yes, I have enormous admiration. People come from those backgrounds and have built, remarkable achievements from that. And when I say remarkable achievements, that doesn't mean, becoming that old doctor lawyer discourse. Just, a successful and good person contributing to the community. And think about all the volunteers in communities. I want to kind of roll back into my ECCV kind of thing. I'm just bowled over by all those incredible people in communities who volunteer their time. What would ethnic communities be without that kind of volunteer labor that, enables organizations? For example, Indian Care. I think you're a board member, aren't you?
Yes.
I mean, I recently had the privilege of attending an event the group had brought together to look at sort of social problems in the Indian community. I was sort of an invited guest. I wasn't like an active member of that conversation, just listening. And, all of that was brought together by volunteers from the community and the board and such. So, that mirrors across, I've been to Hindu temples and seen that, they've with the increasing diaspora community, those, temple committees, collecting the money to grow, doing the advocacy. Similarly, in Sikh communities, Muslim communities, all of those communities have people who do the legwork. I know it's extraordinary. I remember early in my journalistic career, I visited the temple in Rockbank. And at that stage, it was sort of constructed as a sort of a shed. But now I believe it's been much built on, and the ambitions and the hard work that people in communities without any money put in and build is extraordinary, and I pay tribute to that.
This is great. Yes, I hear you because I come from a very multicultural background. My mother is Hindu, my dad's Muslim, and I'm married a Sikh. My aunts are white, my uncles married white women. They live in England, have been living in England forever. In fact, my uncles are not there anymore, but we're still very close to our aunts. So I love this vibrancy that Melbourne brings. I haven't lived in Sydney, so I don't know, but I love the multiculturalism. It is just such a beautiful hum around it, and a good one at that.
Yes, that's right. Look, there's no doubt that some communities, initially sort of find their allies and, strength in each other. But I think, for me, one of the wonderful things about multiculturalism is the intercultural connections and dialogues that build. And, perhaps in that first phase of arrival, you do lean into people from your own, in your own sort of communities, whether that be village or region or town or university. I recall when my parents arrived in the 70s, the first person to come and greet us was a friend of Dad's from university in Sri Lanka, and he took us for a drive to the Adelaide Hills back then, and it was lovely to meet this person had been in Australia for quite a while, and that was like an entree into the society. So I think the way we build our kind of a community takes time, and I think the Indian community particularly is fortunate. It's now a very big community. It's a growing community. It's one of the largest sources of migrants and temporary arrivals and even international students. And so there is a strong community to lean into. But it would be what I would love to say to people from the Indian community in particular is that there is such a added value in participating in an organization like the ECCV, which is, you mentioned our membership. We've got over 220 members, actually close to 300, with about 240 organizations, and then like associate members in individuals. And all of these members are a really strong grassroots base that we draw information from and, consult with in order to make advocacy to state and federal governments, but particularly state governments, because we're a state-based body. And so we are an advocacy body. We're fighting and advocating for the rights and issues of multicultural communities. And as I say, the subcontinental community, particularly people from India, Pakistan, Sri Lanka, and more, Bhutan,
Bangladesh,
the subcontinent. How would you define the subcontinent? How many nations? My geography is a bit stale on Sunday night.
Okay, so obviously, India is the largest country. So there's India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, Bhutan, Nepal.
That's right.
So that's your subcontinent. And even the Nepalese community. I mean, I work across all of them as part of my other pro bono community work, as one of the co-chairs of the Multicultural Women's Alliance Against Family Violence. And we work with, Africans, with Afghans.
That's right.
With Nepalese people, all kinds of people. We haven't got anyone from Sri Lanka, but that's also because we, like you, are an advocating body. We don't get funding, so all of us work pro bono. Slowly, and we are only just a little over just about touching 3 years. We will get there. All of us will. I agree with you. Such a vibrant community. And how would you want ECCV to tap into the multicultural communities? How can they help?
Well, I think the thing is that, for example, we do have a number of Indian background and other groups, but particularly I'm just talking about Indian for the moment, because I think we want to engage, with Indian and Pakistani communities as well as Bangladeshi. And I think the Bangladeshi community, again, is obviously it's a smaller one. And I don't know whether it's as common as it's not a common source country at present. I think that community is an older community. But what we have is, policy committees that the ECCV convenes, again, all voluntary, but we have policy committees on issues such as aging, on issues such as health. I mean, think about it. How many South Asians are involved in the health sector? And for that matter, how many are involved in the aged care sector? If you go to a contemporary nursing room in one of the major cities, the staff will have a large component of people from South Asian backgrounds.
Absolutely.
That's right. And actually, they're incredibly valuable, because built into the South Asian culture, and traditionally, is that great respect for elders. And that's something
it comes naturally to us.
That's right, it does. Caring, that respect for elders comes naturally. So I was going to say, there's so many opportunities to get involved. So I would encourage everyone to get onto our website, www.eccv.org.au. And repeating again, ECCV stands for Ethnic Communities Council of Victoria. And we are a grassroots body. We are our membership, and we're actually 50 years old. Shock horror.
Yep.
We didn't come yesterday. We recently celebrated our 50th birthday, and so we were formed, as like sort of a body to coalesce and advocate for migrant rights, not one community's rights. The migrant rights, for example, around aged care and, issues like employment. We have an employment committee, and we see this with people from multicultural backgrounds, particularly some of our recent migrants. They have very good qualifications in their home country, but they're not always recognized. And sometimes, even if they are recognized, they don't have local experience. And there's a lot of issues around discrimination, their names, when they apply for jobs. So we often see people with very good qualifications and, professional skills not working at the level that they thought they would be. So that's one of the issues that ECCV fights for. For example, we participating currently in a national campaign around better skills recognition, which is a huge issue for newer migrants. And so there's loads of things to be involved with. We have a strong platform of work around mental health.
That was going to be one of my questions.
That's right. Health, yes. We do. I mean, look, we don't run client-facing programs in the sense of, working with, delivery of frontline services like some other organizations. But we work on projects that illustrate, some of our broader advocacy points. So we train workers around mental health, provision. We do a lot of work in aged care. We do a lot of work in informing communities about elder abuse. And we're seeing that in multicultural communities when they bring relatives over and some of the tensions that can occur there. And that's quite serious. So we have an educative function there. And then there's this new frontier that's opened up around climate change and all the challenges around that. And, many, one of the simplest things one of our workers was telling me is that even like, when in incredible Australian heat, say in a regional town, many people would think to open their windows or whatever, but actually that's counter to what's required. You need to pull the blinds and, you might in India open the windows. But
I think most of South Asia, unless you're in Bhutan, yes, you just open the windows to let fresh air in.
That's right. Yeah. So, there's lots of really interesting, aspects to the work we do. And we're there to sort of help and support migrant communities around specific projects, but also do that big advocacy piece. For example, we meet with the Minister for Multicultural Affairs quite regularly, and we can bring up issues of concern. She's very interested in what's going on in multicultural communities. She wants to reach the people, who aren't easy to reach. So, and I know that many people that many of the Indian orgs have direct lines to the minister, of course. But I think that there's a strength in coming together with other communities and finding common cause, because that makes you stronger. Exactly. Think about the employment issues that people face. That's not just for
all of us. I think it's a typical migrant story. I remember 20 years ago when I came, every job interview I went to, I was either overqualified or underqualified. I was never there.
That's right.
And yet 20 years later, I look at it and I'm thinking, wow, it's still the same. I mean, and this is something I want to talk about because, the government keeps giving visas to all these skilled workers and they come and there's no support system.
Well, that's Look, the thing is that we're working in difficult budget environments. So you have to work with government and make the case. But that's something that we're hearing at every level, that the supports aren't there. But good news. Overall, all the economic assessments about migrants show that they are, a very positive economic force in Australia. We're an immigration nation. Absolutely. And that's the key to prosperity in Australia. The sums are in, they've done the maths, and migrants are really good for the bottom line in Australia because we have, if you were to take out the migrants, we have a rapidly aging population.
Absolutely.
And we need
young people. Absolutely.
Bring in the skills, go to the aged care, settings, go to the hospitals, look around who's working there. So it's not just in those highly skilled jobs though. Look at sort of hospitality.
It's everywhere. Yes. Yeah.
That's right. Look at which is obviously hospitality is still a profession as well. But look at even the Uber drivers and the people doing food delivery. That has its own challenges around the regulation of the working conditions in those areas. But there's no part of the Australian economy untouched by migrant workers. And you see the South Asians present in so many important areas of, Australian working life. So it's really, the migrant story is the Australian story. You can't divorce the two.
Well, because migrants were targeted, what did you think of the election results last night?
Yes, now, we at the ECCV are a non-partisan organisation. We work with any party that's elected because that's what advocacy organizations do. But there's no doubt that, part of the success and the return of the government is a perception that the opposition was not, was questioning migration. There was a linkage made around housing and, migrants were causing the housing issues.
Yep.
Hello, no, these are systemic issues that have been going on for decades.
Yes.
And migrants are not the chief driver of the housing issue. And then just
neither are the international students. I mean,
yes, exactly. They're not the chief international students. Migrants, they're not the chief. Refugees, they're not the chief drivers of our housing affordability crisis. So I think, to be honest, recent migrants in particular who speak languages other than English at home, they have very strongly, views around how these debates are framed. And, to win elections, you need to win everybody, but it doesn't appear that the migrant population or the subcontinental population, were strongly backing the opposition. And so, Anthony Albanese, who I might note has an Italian background name.
I didn't know that.
Has had an extraordinary success.
Yes.
But this election, and I saw editorials in Indian publications backing him. Though that said, I also noticed that both parties, and all major, and not just the major parties, other parties, the Greens, for example, have prominent subcontinental and South Asian candidates, which is great.
One of the Greens leader, she's our patron for the Multicultural Alliance.
Okay, is that Farah Farouque?
No, it's Sam. It's Sam Ratnam.
Oh, okay. I see. That's really interesting. Yeah, fantastic. Yeah. So yes, and Sam Ratnam is was the Victorian leader of the Greens. It's not clear whether she's won the contest, but it was good to see in that particular contest. All the people, all the main people were multicultural. Peter Khalil of an Egyptian background versus Samantha Ratnam from a Sri Lankan Tamil background. So it was good to see that kind of contest, whatever the outcome, that we're seeing multicultural Australians, very much at the forefront of power. But look, the Australian parliaments are yet to reflect the great diversity of the Australian population. More than half of us are born overseas or have a parent born overseas. We are, coming back to that familiar theme, a very multicultural society. But look, the future with the young people, I'm just seeing so much diversity also in the way subcontinental young people, South Asian young people are expressing themselves. It's no longer that old trajectory, I think, of the doctor, lawyer, engineer kind of trajectory of old. They're moving into the creative arts. There are so many professions, and it's great to see this flowering of this, diaspora population, which sort of reflects the realities and complexities of migrants. And it's not just, a couple of professions that they go in for. They're everywhere. And I'm really excited to see that.
We are everywhere. I wanted to ask you about racism, which is still, there is an underlying racism here. The opposition leader kept talking about migrants, and we've been talking about migrants. And even with the VMC, I'm part of the regional advisory committee.
So Victorian Multicultural Commission, the government appointed group.
One of the biggest issues that people faced was racism. And for me, I write for a living. That's what I've been doing for the last 25 years. And yet, when people, it's reduced a lot. But the first thing I am asked is, how do you speak English so well? I don't understand. And I remember when I first came here, because I wrote for a living, I was doing 2 magazines in my previous job, many previous jobs ago. And this person came up to me and looked pointedly at my skin, and he said, you actually know English? And I'm like, whoa, whoa. I mean, I worked in England, I worked in Europe, I worked, traveled the world on work. I worked with Americans as part of my USAID job. Nobody's ever asked me, but here they did. And it still happens. People are abused because we look different, because we have an accent. We come from different parts of the world. And that's what we are all about. Like you said, more than half the population in Australia are born overseas. So obviously we have an accent. You don't have an accent because you came very young, as do my girls don't. They are Australians. They don't speak like me. So
Yes.
what have you been? What work has ECCV done in terms of addressing racism?
There's no doubt that racism has been a challenge, and there is different forms of racism. We've seen, in recent times, the rise of the far right. We've seen neo-Nazis, getting out and being highly abusive and appalling. They're like fringe dwellers, but they're still there. They're asserting their voice. We've seen, globally, the rise of Trump and his intolerance. And then we've seen, Islamophobia, we've seen anti-Semitism, and race discrimination around, people coming from by the color of the skin, and that's experienced by subcontinental people, South Asians, and what about African Australians? They get a lot of it as well, extraordinary amounts of racism. Look, I've got the privilege as the CEO of ECCV of being a member of the Victorian government's anti-racism advisory group, and that is a wonderful, place to be. The Victorian government is very concerned about these things, and they've recently launched an anti-racism strategy, which is going to, which has been formulated and to be implemented. Interestingly, that strategy is available in multiple languages. It might be interesting if we can sort of later on put a link up with how
absolutely
in the languages. But it's very clear how there's like a roadmap on how to deal with racism. Of course, one roadmap does not solve the issues of racism at all, because let's not forget. You acknowledged the original owners of this land, First Nations people, before the enormous stain of racism that community has faced. They're the original inhabitants of Australia. So
what happened to their voice vote?
That's right, and we have to acknowledge Australia had a white Australia policy in the past. We've moved to a new era. We don't have those institutional barriers. When you come, you don't have to do they don't pull a dictation test to an Indian in a Polish language or something to trap you. Like in the past, there was all of that stuff. But now we've moved into a different phase. But there's no doubt it manifests in things like employment. People, regularly report that if they have a non-Anglo name, their chances of getting an interview are diminished. These are very practical consequences to people. It manifests in the schoolyard. It can really be debilitating for opportunities there. We see it on the sporting field. So these are very serious issues. I know that nationally, the Australian Human Rights Commission is proposing to have a national strategy, anti-racism strategy. That's an interesting new development. The Australian government has yet to respond to a multicultural framework review. I don't want to get into too many kind of, reviews or whatever, but there was a multicultural framework review commissioned by the Albanese Labor government in its last term. And it's a very comprehensive blueprint around, the future of multiculturalism. They had a great panel who put it together. And so there's a lot of work already done around many of these issues. And I'm feeling optimistic today on Sunday with the return of the Albanese government that they would tackle these issues, because I think there is a recognition in politics about the power of the growing migrant vote is up for bids. It doesn't belong to any one group.
We know,
so,
yes.
And it's just the right thing to do anyway. I think I recall last night the Prime Minister was talking about kindness, welcome and kindness and compassion.
Yes.
Equality of rights is part of that story too. And so I'm hopeful for the future. But it's, the
inshallah.
Story, that's right. Well, look, the migration story is not a closed book. It's an evolving story. And as migrants, you, me, and everyone listening to this podcast has a duty to speak up. We can't just sit there shyly and say, oh, we've just arrived. We don't have anything to contribute. We do have something to contribute. And I hate to use that sort of fashionable phrase, lived experience, but our lived experience as migrants, whether we came as child migrants or as more, as your own experience as an adult, all of those things are, rich and can contribute to policy responses.
I hope so. I live in hope. I'm looking at the time, and I know it's a Sunday night and I've got you here. So I'll quickly go through two things that I am very passionate about. One is mental health and one is digital literacy.
Yes.
So is ECCV doing anything about it?
Of course. Come onto our website.
I'll put the link. Yep.
That's right. We recently did a report around digital literacy among older people. And how important, in fact, many older people don't access services or information through digital means. So, we have to look at face-to-face and other contacts as well. So we've got a very strong interest in digital literacy. So I encourage everyone to come on board or to our website and find that report. It's actually been one of our most downloaded reports that we've ever had, because it's got some really, really rich information about the barriers to accessing information in migrant communities. And then, of course, we have a mental health advisory committee presided over by a really skilled person in Dr. Judy Tang. And
I was chatting with Judy just day before yesterday. She told me about you. Actually, yes, when I told her I was going to be chatting with you, she said, I'm with ECCV. I do the mental health. Yes.
That's right. Yes.
Yes.
That's right. And we do advocate on those topics. So, look, those are huge issues. There's no issue in Australian society that doesn't touch migrants.
Yep.
And, so we need in every mainstream area of policy, the migrant perspective. And that's where we at ECCV can come, be useful. We are not a government body. We're an independent NGO. So we have the power of our independence, which is very valuable.
Absolutely. Last question, Farah. What are you most excited about in the future?
Oh, meeting people
both
like
yourself
you.
And ECCV.
That's right. Meeting people like you, I've been just so, I don't want to sound cliche, but I've just been so impressed with all these amazing men and women that I'm meeting in community, because the strength of migrant community doesn't lie in, people sitting in offices and twirling pens. It lies in communities. And honest conversations about our successes, because we always like to talk about migrant successes. It's sort of built into our kind of narratives, but also the challenges and the failures. I think it's really important to have those open conversations and acknowledge that the migrant story is not some linear story of upward trajectory of success. There are, not everyone's, going to get a PhD and do their parents, proud at the graduation ceremony. There are setbacks, and let's celebrate the different sort of achievements that people have. What about all the wonderful chefs that have come from the subcontinent and are working in the range of restaurants, from actually not just Indian food, Italian food, all sorts of food, the pastry chefs. There's so many skills and different abilities and strengths in the community across the line. And I'm just excited to meet all these amazing people from multicultural backgrounds, recent immigrants, people from second generation. Just because you're a parent, just because you're not, you were born here, doesn't mean you don't identify as a multicultural person, whether through language or, food or other connections. So there are many, many threads to the multicultural story. And I'm delighted to be contributing to it.
We need more people like you, honestly.
Thank you. Thank you. Before you go, and I know we're over time, but I just want to mention my connection to India. My mum is a graduate of the was a graduate in the 60s in the University of Madras, which has obviously changed its name.
Yep.
Madras
now,
for me. Now known
Madras,
as
I can never say. Yeah, I can't say Chennai.
That's right. And she had 10 years in living in Chennai, or now then known as Madras, and my and on my mother's maternal side we have ancestry to southern India, so I lay claim to that tonight. Not just Sri Lankan, but I lay claim to my Indian heritage as well.
There you go.
Oh, okay.
Thank you for joining, Mariana. This is one of my friends. Great point on second generation, how her father migrated from South Africa.
Yeah. Fantastic.
Yes, and we've all been through, either underqualified or overqualified. Her father was an engineer and then had to start from the bottom. So
that's right. Exactly.
I think all of us of us have been there.
But you know what? As we recognize the second generation, let's not all be just wedded to that narrative of success. Let's have those conversations about our challenges, including the conversation about racism, and that the migrant trajectory isn't that. We all have our setbacks, and I think more open. And you mentioned mental health. And I think even more mental health, more open conversations about mental health in our South Asian communities is so important. And of course, I know you have done work in the family violence area as well. That is, I think that's probably another podcast. But there's there are challenges as well as things to celebrate.
Absolutely. Farah, thank you so much. I'm sure we will talk soon. I love the work that the ECCV does. And like I said, special place in my heart. My daughter got her first work experience and her first pay from ECCV 20 years ago, but nonetheless, very important. Very important for her and absolutely very important for me. And by the time my younger daughter went into year 10, we were all prepared. Thanks to ECCV, we knew exactly what to do. And my daughter, younger one, is a lawyer. Not because we put pressure, but we are living the migrant dream.
Oh, wonderful. Excellent. Congratulations on your daughters. And I'm glad that ECCV was able to contribute a tiny bit on her journey to success.
Yes, it did. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us. Have a good night. And Farah, talk to you soon.
Bye. Thank you so much.